I will never forget that night. It was late, close to midnight, when the emergency room doors burst open. A woman was rushed in on a stretcher, her face pale, lips trembling. She was barely conscious, but the panic in her eyes told me she knew something was terribly wrong. I was the attending doctor that night, and as soon as I laid eyes on her, I knew she was in serious trouble. Her vitals were dropping, and she needed immediate surgery. There was no time to waste. I called for the team and prepped for the operation. I didn't know her name, her history, or anything about her, only that she was a human being in need of help. In the operating room, my hands moved with precision. Years of training, sacrifice, and dedication led me to this moment. I didn't care about anything except saving her life. The procedure was complicated, but we managed to stabilize her. She was going to live. It wasn't until the next morning that I saw her awake. I walked into her room, ready to explain what had happened. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she just stared at me. And then, something changed in her expression, something I had seen before but never in a situation like this: disgust. She looked at me like I was the worst thing she had ever seen. "Where is my doctor?" she asked, her voice weak but sharp. I frowned, confused. "I'm your doctor. I performed your surgery." Her face twisted in horror. She looked around the room, as if expecting someone else to come in and tell her this was a joke. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible." I sighed. I had dealt with racism before, many times in fact, but I never expected to hear it from someone whose life I had just saved. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you were brought in last night in critical condition. You needed immediate surgery and I performed it. You're alive because of the work my team and I did." She just kept shaking her head, her breathing getting heavier. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the way her mind was struggling to accept the truth. She wanted to be angry, but she also knew she owed me her life. "I don't want you near me," she spat. "I want another doctor." I took a deep breath. I had been through years of medical school, residency, and long nights of study. I had given everything to be in this position. And yet, none of it mattered to her. To her, I was just a black man. Nothing else. I should have been angry. I should have walked out of that room and let someone else deal with her. But instead, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling something deeper than anger. Sadness, pity. "You don't have to like me," I said, "but you can't change the fact that I saved your life." She didn't respond, just turned her head away, refusing to look at me. For the next few days, she barely spoke to me. She only answered when absolutely necessary, and even then it was short, clipped responses. If I asked how she was feeling, she would respond with a curt, "Fine." If I explained something about her treatment, she would nod but avoid eye contact. The hostility in her silence was loud enough. She would stiffen when I walked into the room as if my presence alone made her uncomfortable. I had seen this kind of reaction before, but never so openly from a patient who owed me her life. I tried to be professional, but deep down, it hurt. No matter what I did, no matter how much I proved myself, there would always be people who saw me as less. It was a weight I had carried for years, but that didn't make it any easier. I went home each night thinking about it, questioning if I had done enough, if I had handled things the right way. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about me. This was about her, about the hatred she had been raised with, about the fear she was struggling to let go of. And as much as I wanted to reach her, I couldn't force change upon her. She had to come to it on her own. Then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as I was making my rounds, I saw her sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She looked different, quieter, reflective. I debated whether to say anything, but before I could walk past, she spoke. "Why did you save me?" I turned to her, surprised. "Because it's my job." She shook her head. "No, I mean, if you knew who I was, if you knew what I believed, why would you still do it?" I hesitated, then walked into the room and sat down in the chair beside her bed. "Because I took an oath," I said. "Because when you came into this hospital, you weren't just a racist woman, you were a person who needed help. And because I believe that hate doesn't cure hate, only kindness does." She was silent for a long time. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I was raised to think a certain way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My parents, my town, my whole life, it was all about keeping people like you away. I don't even know why I felt that way. I just did. I nodded. I had heard stories like this before. Hatred is rarely born, it's taught. She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since she had woken up. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't say anything right away. I let the moment sit, let her words settle. Then, I nodded. Thank you, I said simply. The next few days, she started talking to me more. She asked about my life, my family, why I became a doctor. Slowly, I could see the walls she had built her whole life start to crack. By the time she was discharged, she reached out her hand, a small, hesitant gesture. I shook it, and in that moment, I knew something had changed in her. Maybe she would never be fully different, maybe old habits and beliefs would still linger, but she had seen something she couldn't ignore. A black man had saved her life, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hate me for it. As she walked out of the hospital, I watched her go, hoping that this experience had planted a seed, that maybe, just maybe, the next time she looked at someone who didn't look like her, she would see something different. Not an enemy, not a threat, just a person.